The roar of the raging river drowned out Gwendolyn Harper's screams as she watched her 5-year-old son, Samuel, clinging desperately to a fallen tree branch in the swollen waters of the Pecos River. Spring rains had transformed the normally placid waterway into a monster that clawed at everything in its path, and now it had her boy. "Samuel!" she screamed again, racing along the muddy bank, her skirts heavy with rain and river water as she stumbled over rocks and debris. The Texas sky, which had been clear just hours ago, now hung low and threatening, the storm having passed but leaving destruction in its wake. Gwendolyn had only turned away for a moment. They'd been collecting kindling near the river's edge when the bank had given way beneath Samuel's small feet. She'd lunged for him, her fingertips grazing his sleeve before the current snatched him away. "Help! Somebody help!" she cried out, but the small homestead she'd built after her husband's death last winter was isolated, a mile outside of Hillsboro, Texas. No one would hear her desperate pleas. The river bent around a rocky outcropping and Samuel disappeared from view, his terrified face the last thing she saw before the water carried him around the bend. Gwendolyn collapsed to her knees, mud soaking through her dress, a primal scream tearing from her throat. "Madam, what's happened?" The deep voice cut through her despair like a knife. Gwendolyn whirled to see a tall figure on horseback, a bay stallion dancing nervously beneath him as the rider assessed the scene with alert eyes. He wore a battered leather hat, drenched from the rain, and a weather-worn duster. A cowboy, likely passing through or working at one of the ranches that dotted this part of Hill County. "My boy. The river took my boy." She pointed frantically downstream. "He's only 5, he can't swim well enough in this current." Without hesitation, the cowboy spurred his horse forward along the riverbank. "How far ahead?" "Just around that bend. He's holding onto a branch, please hurry." The man touched the brim of his hat. "I'll find him, madam." With that, he kicked his horse into a gallop, following the river's path. Gwendolyn struggled to her feet and began running again, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the ache in her legs. She couldn't lose Samuel. She'd already buried her husband, Thomas, after a winter fever took him. Samuel was all she had left in this world. The cowboy was far ahead now, his form becoming smaller as he raced the river. She watched as he suddenly veered away from the bank, cutting across a stretch of land where the river doubled back. He was trying to get ahead of Samuel. Gwendolyn pushed herself harder, ignoring the branches that tore at her sleeves and face. When she rounded the bend, her heart nearly stopped. The river widened here, the current churning violently around boulders and fallen trees. In the distance, she could see the cowboy had dismounted. He was tying his lariat to a sturdy tree, then securing the other end around his waist. Without hesitation, he waded into the churning waters. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw what he had spotted: Samuel, still clinging to the branch, but now it was caught against a rock formation in the middle of the river. The boy's face was pale with fear, his small hands white-knuckled as they gripped the wood. "Hold tight, boy," the cowboy shouted over the roar of the water. "I'm coming for you." The current immediately pushed against the man, trying to sweep him away, but he fought against it, powerful arms cutting through the water. The rope around his waist grew taut as he battled the river's fury. Gwendolyn reached the spot where the cowboy's horse stood, nervously pawing the ground. She grabbed the reins to steady the animal, her eyes never leaving the scene playing out in the river. The cowboy was making progress, moving diagonally with the current rather than against it, using its force to help propel him toward Samuel. When a floating branch slammed into his shoulder, Gwendolyn gasped, but he barely seemed to notice. "I need to help him," she whispered, looking for anything she could use. Spotting a coil of rope hanging from the cowboy's saddle, She grabbed it and began searching for a spot where she might secure it. In the river, the cowboy had nearly reached Samuel. He was shouting something to the boy, but the words were lost in the river's roar. Samuel reached one small hand toward the man, keeping the other firmly wrapped around the branch. The moment hung suspended in time, the cowboy's outstretched fingers inches from Samuel's before the branch shifted, twisting in the current. Samuel lost his grip and plunged beneath the surface. "No!" Gwendolyn screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. The cowboy lunged forward, disappearing beneath the muddy water. Long seconds passed, the river churning indifferently over the spot where they had vanished. Then, with a mighty splash, the cowboy resurfaced, one arm wrapped firmly around Samuel's small body. The boy was coughing and sputtering, but alive, gloriously alive. "Pull us in," the cowboy shouted, and Gwendolyn realized he was calling to someone on the far bank. A second rider had appeared, and was now hauling on the rope attached to the cowboy, drawing them slowly toward shore against the current's resistance. Gwendolyn didn't wait. She ran downstream, crossing at a narrow point where the water was shallower, fighting through the knee-deep flow until she reached the opposite bank. By then, the second rider had pulled the cowboy and Samuel to safety. She fell to her knees beside her son, gathering his soaked, shivering body into her arms. "Samuel, oh my sweet boy," she sobbed, covering his face with kisses, her fingers checking him for injuries. "Mama," he coughed, clinging to her neck. "The man saved me." Gwendolyn looked up at their rescuer, who stood dripping and breathing hard, hands braced on his knees. His hat was gone, revealing dark hair plastered to his forehead and intense blue eyes that assessed Samuel with concern. "Thank you," she managed, the words wholly inadequate for what this stranger had done. "You saved my son's life." The cowboy straightened, pushing wet hair from his face. "Name's Mitchell Yates, madam. This here's my brother Luke." He nodded toward the second rider, a younger man with the same strong jawline. "We were heading back to our ranch when I heard you calling." "Gwendolyn Harper," she replied, still clutching Samuel tightly. "And this is my boy, Samuel. We have a small homestead just upriver." Mitchell nodded, his gaze taking in her mud-soaked dress and the exhaustion evident on her face. "That storm's left the river dangerous. You two shouldn't be out here alone." Under normal circumstances, Gwendolyn might have bristled at his words. She'd been managing on her own since Thomas died, but today she could only nod in agreement. "We were gathering kindling." The bank collapsed under him. "You're both soaked through," Luke observed, removing his own dry coat and draping it around Gwendolyn's shoulders. "Our ranch is closer than your homestead, I reckon. You should come back with us, get the boy warm." "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, Mrs. Harper," Mitchell cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "That boy needs to get warm and dry and quick. The Lazy Y is just over that rise." Gwendolyn hesitated only a moment before nodding. Samuel was shivering violently against her, his lips tinged with blue. "Thank you." Mitchell whistled, and his bay stallion, which had followed them downstream, trotted over. In one smooth motion, Mitchell lifted Samuel from Gwendolyn's arms and placed him on the saddle, then swung up behind him. "Luke, help Mrs. Harper onto your horse," he directed, wrapping one strong arm around Samuel to keep him secure. The younger Yates brother assisted Gwendolyn onto his mount, and soon they were making their way across the rolling Texas landscape. As they rode, Gwendolyn couldn't help stealing glances at the man who had risked his life to save her son. Mitchell Yates sat tall in the saddle despite his drenched clothing, one arm securely around Samuel, who had stopped shivering and was now looking around with interest. The Lazy Y Ranch appeared as they crested a hill, a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. It was larger than Gwendolyn had expected, clearly a successful operation. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shielding her eyes against the post-storm brightness. "Mitchell Yates, what in heaven's name?" she began, then stopped as she took in the sight of the bedraggled group. "Bring them inside, quickly." Within minutes, Gwendolyn found herself and Samuel wrapped in warm blankets beside a roaring fire in a comfortable sitting room. The woman, who introduced herself as Elena Yates, the brother's widowed mother, had whisked Samuel off to change him into some old clothes of Luke's, while providing Gwendolyn with a dress that was only slightly too large. "Your boy will be fine," Elena assured her, pressing a cup of hot tea into Gwendolyn's hands. "Children bounce back quicker than we expect." Mitchell entered the room, having also changed into dry clothing. His wet hair, now combed back, had dried into waves the color of rich coffee. Without the distraction of the emergency, Gwendolyn noticed how handsome he was, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by the Texas sun but still youthful. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, perhaps 5 years older than her 27 years. "How is he?" Mitchell asked, his deep voice filled with genuine concern. "Thanks to you, he'll be just fine," Gwendolyn replied. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Mitchell waved away her thanks. "Any man would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not any man would have ridden into those rapids. You risked your life for a child you didn't know." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Well, I couldn't just ride by." Elena returned with Samuel, now dressed in dry clothes and looking remarkably recovered. He ran immediately to Mitchell, staring up at the tall cowboy with undisguised hero worship. "You swam real good, mister," Samuel declared. "The water was trying to eat me up, but you didn't let it." Mitchell crouched down to the boy's level, his expression softening. "You were mighty brave holding onto that branch, Samuel. That took real courage." Samuel beamed at the praise, then frowned suddenly. "But the river took my pa's knife." He looked tearfully at Gwendolyn. "I had it in my pocket, Mama, the one Pa gave me before he went to heaven." Gwendolyn's heart clenched. The small pocket knife had been Thomas's parting gift to his son, a token Samuel treasured above all else. "Oh, Samuel, I'm sorry, but the important thing is you're safe." Mitchell ruffled the boy's hair. "Tell you what, partner. When the river calms down, we'll go look for it. Sometimes the river gives back what it takes." "Really?" Hope blossomed on Samuel's face. "Can't promise we'll find it, but we can try," Mitchell said. Elena interrupted gently. "Supper will be ready soon. Mrs. Harper, you and your boy are welcome to stay the night. It'll be dark before long, and those roads aren't safe after a storm like this." Gwendolyn started to protest, but looking at Samuel's exhausted face, she relented. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Yates. We accept with gratitude." During supper, Gwendolyn learned more about the Yates family. The Lazy Y had been established by Mitchell's father 20 years earlier, in 1853. After his death 3 years ago, Mitchell had taken over operations with Luke's help. They ran several hundred head of cattle and had a reputation for fair dealing in the county. "And what of your homestead, Mrs. Harper?" Elena asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "Thomas, my husband, and I came to Texas from Missouri 5 years ago. We built our place from nothing." Gwendolyn's voice softened with pride and sadness. "After he died last winter, I've been keeping it going the best I can." "Alone?" Mitchell asked, his blue eyes sharp with concern. "We have 20 acres, a few milk cows, chickens, and a good vegetable garden," she explained. "It's not much, but it's ours, Samuel's inheritance. I hire help from town when I need it for the heavier work." Mitchell nodded, though his expression suggested he had more thoughts on the matter. Before he could speak, Samuel piped up. "Mama makes the best pies in Hill County," he announced proudly. "She sells them to the general store in Hillsboro." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Is that so? Well, I'd welcome the competition. I've been supplying Mrs. Olson's boarding house for years." The conversation flowed easily after that, and Gwendolyn found herself relaxing for the first time in months. There was something comforting about sitting at a table filled with others, sharing a meal that she hadn't had to prepare herself. Later, after Samuel had been tucked into bed in one of the spare rooms, Gwendolyn stepped onto the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. The night air was cool after the storm, stars emerging in the clearing sky. "He's a fine boy," Mitchell's voice came from the shadows. He stepped forward, offering her a steaming cup of coffee. "Thank you." She accepted the cup, grateful for its warmth. "He's all I have left of Thomas." Mitchell leaned against the porch railing beside her. "How long were you married?" "6 years. We knew each other since childhood in Missouri." Gwendolyn sipped her coffee, the bitter warmth a comfort. The fever took him so quickly. One day he was breaking a new colt, the next he was burning with fever, and a week later he was gone. "I'm sorry," Mitchell said, his voice soft with genuine sympathy. "Losing someone you love leaves a hole nothing seems to fill." The understanding in his voice made her look up at him. "You've lost someone too," he nodded, his profile strong against the starlit sky. "My wife, Catherine, 4 years ago, childbirth." His words were clipped, as if even after all this time they were difficult to say. "The baby too. A daughter." "I'm sorry," Gwendolyn echoed his earlier words, feeling their inadequacy. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, two people who understood grief too well. "Your land," Mitchell finally said. "Is it good bottom land? The soil's rich, especially near the river. But that's the trouble too, the flooding." Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "Has it flooded before?" "Twice since we settled there. Never this bad, though." She sighed. "Thomas built the house on higher ground, but our fencing along the river keeps washing out." "I could help with that," he offered. "Show you how to build a barrier that might hold better against the spring floods." Gwendolyn turned to face him fully. "Mr. Yates, you've already done more than enough. I couldn't ask for more help." "Mitchell," he corrected gently. "And you're not asking, I'm offering." He smiled, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. "Besides, I promised Samuel we'd look for his knife when the river calmed." "That's very kind of you," she said, surprised by the flutter in her chest at his smile. "It's just being neighborly, Mrs. Harper." "Gwendolyn," she returned, "if I'm to call you Mitchell." Their eyes met in the dim light from the house windows, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. The moment was broken by Eleanor calling from inside. "Gwendolyn, I've turned down the bed in the blue room for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Yates," she called back. To Mitchell she added, "I should get some rest, it's been quite a day." He straightened, taking her empty coffee cup. "Of course. Sleep well, Gwendolyn." As she walked back inside, Gwendolyn couldn't help but feel that something had shifted in her world, something beyond the terror of almost losing Samuel. For the first time since Thomas's death, she'd connected with someone who understood her loss, who didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. Mitchell Yates had saved more than her son today. He'd thrown a lifeline to her as well, though he might not know it yet. 3 days later, Gwendolyn stood in her kitchen, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. After returning to their homestead the day after the flood, she'd expected to see Mitchell Yates riding up to make good on his offer to help with the river fencing. But 3 days had passed with no sign of the tall cowboy. She told herself it was foolish to feel disappointed. The man had already done more than enough, and he had his own ranch to run. The fact that Samuel asked about him a dozen times a day only made it worse. "Mama, When is Mr. Mitchell coming to help find my knife?" Samuel asked for the third time that morning, looking up from the wooden horse he was carving, a skill Thomas had just begun teaching him before his death. "I don't know, sweetheart," she replied, trying to keep her tone light. "Mr. Yates is a busy man. He runs a big ranch, remember?" Samuel's lower lip protruded slightly, but he promised. "He said he'd try, Samuel. There's a difference." Gwendolyn dusted flour from her hands and checked the sky through the window. Spring in Texas meant unpredictable weather, but today was clear and mild, perfect for the outdoor chores she needed to tackle. The sound of hoofbeats made them both look up. Samuel dropped his carving and raced to the window. "It's him, Mama. It's Mr. Mitchell. And he's got a wagon and everything." Sure enough, Mitchell Yates was approaching their homestead, driving a wagon loaded with lumber and tools. Luke rode alongside on horseback, and behind them came two more riders Gwendolyn didn't recognize. "Samuel, go wash your face and hands," she instructed, suddenly aware of her own appearance. She wore one of her everyday dresses, sleeves rolled up for baking, her hair escaping its pins after a morning of work. There was no time to change, but she hastily smoothed her apron and tucked stray hair behind her ears. By the time she stepped onto the porch, the small procession had reached their yard. Mitchell set the brake on the wagon and jumped down, his movements fluid and confident. He removed his hat as he approached the porch. "Morning, Mrs. Harper," he greeted her, then smiled as Samuel burst from the house and bounded down the steps. "And good morning to you, young Samuel." "You came," Samuel exclaimed. "Are we going to look for my knife today?" Mitchell ruffled the boy's hair. "That's one reason we're here. But first, I thought we might help your ma with some of that fencing you told me about." He turned to Gwendolyn. "I hope we're not intruding. I brought Luke and a couple of our hands, Ben and Charlie. Thought we might get that river fencing shored up before the next rain." Gwendolyn was momentarily speechless at the gesture. "I thank you, Mitchell. That's incredibly kind, but I can't accept so much help without payment." Mitchell shook his head. "No payment necessary. Though I wouldn't say no to some of that pie Samuel's been bragging about." His smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. She found herself smiling back. "I think that can be arranged." The men went to work immediately, unloading the wagon and discussing the best approach to the fencing. Gwendolyn insisted on providing a midday meal at the very least, and busied herself in the kitchen preparing a hearty stew and fresh bread. From the window, she watched Mitchell directing the work, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. He worked alongside his men, not above the physical labor, and she noted how they respected him, following his lead without question. Samuel shadowed Mitchell constantly, asking questions and offering his small assistance whenever possible. To his credit, Mitchell never shooed the boy away, instead finding small tasks Samuel could manage and explaining what he was doing in terms a 5-year-old could understand. By midday, the men had already made significant progress. When Gwendolyn called them in for the meal, they filed into her small house, washing up at the pump outside before taking seats at her table. It was a tight fit, but the atmosphere was jovial. "This is the best stew I've had in an age, Mrs. Harper," Charlie, the older of the two ranch hands, declared after his first bite. "Thank you," she replied, pleased. "And please call me Gwendolyn. The lady can cook and she's pretty as a Texas sunrise," Ben, the younger hand, added with a wink. No wonder the boss was so eager to ride out here. Mitchell shot Ben a warning look that made Gwendolyn hide a smile behind her napkin. The young cowhand immediately busied himself with his stew, but Luke caught her eye and grinned, clearly amused by his brother's discomfort. After the meal, the men returned to work while Gwendolyn cleared the table. Samuel had gone with them, proudly carrying a small hammer Mitchell had entrusted to him. As she washed the dishes, Gwendolyn found herself humming something she hadn't done since before Thomas's death. The house felt different with the sounds of men's voices and laughter drifting in from outside. Not better than when Thomas was alive, but different from the quiet emptiness that had characterized the past months. By late afternoon, the work was completed, a sturdy fence reinforced with a carefully constructed barrier of rocks and lumber that would divert the water's force during floods. As the men packed up their tools, Mitchell approached Gwendolyn where she stood by the porch. "That should hold through the spring floods," he told her. "And most others, I reckon." "I don't know how to thank you," she replied, meaning it. "You've done so much for us already." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming less sure of himself than when directing the work. "Well, there's one more thing. I promised Samuel we'd look for his knife." Gwendolyn glanced to where Samuel was helping Luke load tools into the wagon. The river's still running high. Not as bad as before. "I thought I'd take him downstream a ways, check the sandbars and eddies where things tend to wash up." She hesitated, the memory of Samuel being swept away still too fresh. "I don't want him near that water." "I understand," Mitchell said, his voice gentle. "He can stay up on the bank with you. I'll do the searching." The consideration in his offer touched her. "All right, but please be careful." They walked down to the river together, Samuel racing ahead in excitement while the other men continued loading the wagon. The water had receded considerably, but still ran swifter than normal. Mitchell had brought a long pole to probe the riverbed in shallow areas. "Now, Samuel," he said, crouching down to the boy's level. "Where exactly were you when you went into the water?" Samuel pointed to a spot upriver where the bank had partially collapsed. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "The current was running that way, so anything that fell would likely end up." He walked downstream, eyes scanning the riverbanks. "Somewhere along here." For the next hour, Mitchell waded in the shallower parts of the river, probing with his pole and occasionally bending to examine something in the water. Samuel watched with rapt attention, while Gwendolyn found herself studying Mitchell, his methodical approach, his patience, the way he took Samuel's loss seriously instead of dismissing it as trivial. Finally, at a point where the river curved and slowed, forming a small pool against the bank, Mitchell paused. He waded deeper, the water reaching his thighs, and bent to reach into the muddy bottom. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, straightening up with something in his hand. "Did you find it?" Samuel called, bouncing on his toes. Mitchell waded back to shore, water streaming from his soaked pants. When he reached them, he knelt and opened his palm to reveal a mud-covered object. "Is this it?" he asked, as Samuel leaned forward eagerly. With careful fingers, the boy took the item and rubbed away the mud. As the wooden handle with its distinctive carving emerged, Samuel's face lit up with joy. "It is. It's Pa's knife." He threw his arms around Mitchell's neck, heedless of the mud and water. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell." Mitchell returned the hug, his eyes meeting Gwendolyn's over Samuel's shoulder. The warmth in his gaze made her breath catch. "You're welcome, Samuel," he said, standing up. "The river gave it back, just like I said it might." Samuel was already examining the knife, checking that the blade still folded out properly. "Pa made this himself," he explained to Mitchell. "See the horse he carved here, and my initials." "Fine craftsmanship," Mitchell agreed. "Your pa must have been good with his hands." "He was the best," Samuel declared proudly. "He built our whole house and made lots of furniture, too." Gwendolyn swallowed the lump in her throat. "We should let Mr. Yates get back to his men," she said softly. "It's getting late." As they walked back to the homestead, Samuel ran ahead again, eager to show Luke and the others his recovered treasure. "You've made him very happy," Gwendolyn said to Mitchell. "Finding that knife meant more than I can express." Mitchell nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the little things are what matter most after someone's gone. The reminders. Yes, she agreed, thinking of Thomas's hat that still hung by the door, the book of poetry he'd been reading the week before he died, still marked at the last page he'd seen. They reached the yard to find the wagon loaded and the men mounted up, ready to leave. Samuel was showing his knife to Luke, who was appropriately impressed. "We should be heading back," Mitchell said. "Daylight's wasting." "Of course." Gwendolyn suddenly remembered something. "Wait just a moment." She hurried into the house, returning with a carefully wrapped bundle. "The pie I promised, apple and blackberry." Mitchell accepted it with a smile. "Much appreciated, though I'd have helped anyway." "I know," she said simply. He placed the pie in the wagon and turned back to her. "I was thinking," he began, then paused, clearing his throat. "The Lazy Y is having a spring gathering next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and friends, some good food, maybe some music. You and Samuel would be welcome." Gwendolyn felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time, anticipation, perhaps. "That sounds lovely. We'd be happy to come." The smile that spread across Mitchell's face was worth the momentary nervousness she'd felt. "Good. That's good." He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle with easy grace. "Around midday, if that suits." "We'll be there," she promised. As the men rode away, Samuel waving enthusiastically until they disappeared over the rise, Gwendolyn remained on the porch, a strange lightness in her heart. Today had reminded her of what it was like to have help, to have company, to not carry every burden alone. And perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it even to herself, it had reminded her what it was like to feel a connection with someone whose blue eyes seemed to understand both her strength and her vulnerability. The week passed in a flurry of activity as Gwendolyn prepared for the gathering at the Lazy Y. She baked 3 pies: apple, cherry, and peach, despite telling herself that one would have been sufficient. She also spent an evening altering her best dress, which hadn't been worn since before Samuel was born. The blue calico had faded somewhat but still looked presentable with fresh lace added at the collar and cuffs. "Why are you sewing flowers on your dress, Mama?" Samuel asked, watching her work by lamplight after he should have been asleep. "Just freshening it up a bit," she replied, trying to sound casual. "For Mr. Yates's gathering tomorrow." Samuel nodded wisely. "You want to look pretty for Mr. Mitchell." Gwendolyn pricked her finger in surprise, a drop of blood welling up. "I just want to look respectable, Samuel," she corrected, though the heat in her cheeks suggested otherwise. "Now back to bed with you. We have a busy day tomorrow." After he'd gone, she examined her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. At 27, she was still young, though the past year of hard work and grief had left its mark. Fine lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes, and her hands were rougher than they'd once been. But her honey blonde hair still shone in the lamplight, and her green eyes, though often shadowed with tiredness, were clear and bright tonight. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to her reflection. "He's just being neighborly." Yet she couldn't help the anticipation that bubbled up when she thought of seeing Mitchell again. Saturday dawned clear and perfect, the Texas spring showing its gentler side. By mid-morning, Gwendolyn had bathed herself and Samuel, dressed them in their best clothes, loaded the pies into the small wagon, and hitched up their mare, Blossom. "We look mighty fine, don't we, Mama?" Samuel declared, proudly wearing his Sunday shirt and the small bolo tie Thomas had made him. "Handsome as can be," she agreed, straightening his collar. The ride to the Lazy Y took nearly an hour, giving Gwendolyn ample time to second-guess her decision to come. What if Mitchell had only invited them out of pity? What if the other guests looked down on her, a widow struggling to keep her small homestead afloat, By the time they approached the ranch, she'd almost convinced herself to turn around. Then Samuel spotted the gathering and let out a whoop of excitement. "Look, Mama, there's so many people. And is that music?" Indeed, the sounds of a fiddle and guitar drifted through the air. The area in front of the Yates home had been transformed, tables laden with food, benches arranged for seating, lanterns strung between posts, though they wouldn't be lit until evening. At least 30 people milled about, some dancing on a wooden platform that had been laid on the ground, others chatting in groups or playing horseshoes. As Gwendolyn guided Blossom toward the area where other wagons were parked, she spotted Mitchell emerging from the barn. He wore a clean white shirt with a black vest and his best denims, his dark hair combed neatly back. When he saw their wagon, his face broke into a smile that made Gwendolyn's heart skip a beat. "You came," he said simply as he approached to help her down. "We said we would," she replied, accepting his hand and trying to ignore the warmth that spread from his touch. Samuel didn't wait for assistance, jumping down from the wagon with a whoop. "Mr. Mitchell, we brought pies." Mitchell laughed, a rich sound that Gwendolyn realized she'd been waiting to hear again. "Well then, you're the most popular guests already. Let me help you with those." He lifted the basket of pies from the wagon bed, then offered Gwendolyn his arm. "Let me introduce you around. Most folks here are neighbors, some from as far as Abbott or Mount Calm." Gwendolyn placed her hand lightly on his arm, suddenly nervous. "I hope we're not intruding." "Never that," he assured her, leading her toward the gathering. "You and Samuel are welcome here anytime." Eleanor Yates spotted them approaching and hurried over, her face lighting up. "Gwendolyn, I'm so glad you came." She embraced Gwendolyn warmly, then bent to Samuel's level. "And Master Samuel, my, don't you look handsome today." Samuel beamed at the praise. "Mama made me wash behind my ears twice." The adults laughed, and the ice was broken. Soon, Gwendolyn found herself swept into the gathering, introduced to neighbors and friends of the Yates family. To her surprise, she recognized several faces from Hillsborough, including Mrs. Olson, who ran the boarding house and bought her pies. "So you're the competition Eleanor mentioned," Mrs. Olson said with a friendly wink. "I've been enjoying your pies at the general store. Remarkable crust." "Thank you," Gwendolyn replied, pleased. "It was my mother's recipe." Throughout the afternoon, Gwendolyn found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of community that she'd been missing since Thomas's death. Samuel quickly found playmates among the other children, and she watched him run and play with a lightness in his step she hadn't seen in months. Mitchell moved through the gathering with easy confidence, a natural host who made everyone feel welcome. Yet Gwendolyn noticed how often his eyes sought her out across the yard, how he periodically appeared at her side to refill her lemonade or introduce her to someone new. "Your brother seems quite taken with the widow Harper," Gwendolyn overheard an older woman saying to Luke as she passed behind them. Luke's response made her pause out of sight. "Never seen him like this, Mrs. Daniels, not since Catherine." "It's been 4 years," the woman replied. "High time he found someone new, and she seems a fine woman raising that boy alone." "She is that," Luke agreed. "Strong as they come, but gentle too. Mitch needs that." Gwendolyn moved away, her cheeks flushed and her heart racing. She shouldn't have eavesdropped, but knowing that others had noticed Mitchell's attention both thrilled and terrified her. She wasn't ready, was she? Thomas had only been gone 15 months. Yet as she watched Mitchell across the yard, laughing as he helped Samuel onto a gentle pony for a ride, something inside her shifted. Thomas would always be in her heart, but perhaps it was possible to make room for someone new. As evening approached, lanterns were lit, and the music grew livelier. Couples took to the dancing platform, and children chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. Gwendolyn sat with Alina and several other women, watching the dancers. "Would you care to dance?" She looked up to find Mitchell standing before her, hand extended. For a moment, she hesitated. She hadn't danced since before Thomas fell ill. "I'm a bit out of practice," she admitted. "So am I," he replied with a self-deprecating smile. "We can stumble together." Alina gave her a gentle nudge. "Go on, dear, it's just a dance." But as Mitchell led her to the platform, Gwendolyn knew it wasn't just a dance. It was a step toward something new, something both frightening and exhilarating. The fiddle player struck up a waltz, and Mitchell's hand settled at her waist, warm and steady. She placed her hand on his shoulder, acutely aware of the strength beneath the clean cotton of his shirt. "I should warn you," he said as they began to move. "Luke says I have 2 left feet." "Fortunately, I have 2 right ones," she replied, surprising herself with the teasing response. Mitchell laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "We'll make a fine pair then." Despite their claims of rustiness, they moved well together, finding a natural rhythm. Mitchell was more graceful than he'd let on, guiding her with confidence around the platform. "Thank you for inviting us today," Gwendolyn said after a moment. "Samuel hasn't had this much fun in ages." Mitchell's eyes softened as he glanced to where Samuel was learning to play horseshoes with Luke. "He's a good boy. You've done well with him." "I'm trying," she admitted. "But it's not easy raising a son alone. There are things a boy should learn from a man." Mitchell nodded, understanding. "My father died when Luke was about Samuel's age. Our mother did her best, but there were hard times." "How did you manage?" Neighbors helped. "Men like Mr. Daniels over there took Luke hunting, taught him to rope. Later, I tried to fill those boots for him." Mitchell guided her through a turn. "That's one thing about Texas, people step up when needed." "Not everywhere," Gwendolyn said softly. "After Thomas died, some folks in town started suggesting I couldn't manage the homestead, that I should sell and move into town. One neighbor, Jacob Turner, even offered to buy our land at half its value. For my own good, he said." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Turner's been trying to expand his holdings for years. Not always honestly, from what I've heard." "He's been persistent," she acknowledged. "Sends his foreman over every month or so with a new offer, each one lower than the last, as if he's waiting for me to become desperate." "Has he threatened you?" Mitchell's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. "No, nothing like that, just pressure." She didn't mention the time Turner's foreman had frightened her by appearing suddenly at her door after dark, or how the man had implied she was foolish to live so isolated with a young child. "I can handle Jacob Turner." Mitchell studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I believe you can. But remember, you're not alone anymore. If Turner or his men bother you, I want to know about it." The protectiveness in his voice warmed her, though she'd been independent for so long that it also made her wary. "I appreciate that, but I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be that," he said with such conviction that her breath caught. The music ended, but Mitchell didn't immediately release her. For a moment they stood close, the connection between them almost tangible in the lantern light. Then Samuel's voice broke the spell. "Mama." "Mr. Mitchell." "I hit the stake with the horseshoe." Mitchell stepped back, his hand lingering briefly on hers before dropping away. "We'd better go see this horseshoe champion," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. As they walked together toward the horseshoe pit, Gwendolyn was acutely aware of how natural it felt to be at Mitchell's side, how his presence made her feel both stronger and more feminine than she had in months. It was confusing and wonderful all at once. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Samuel eventually fell asleep on a blanket near the house, exhausted from the day's excitement. As the gathering began to disperse, Mitchell helped Gwendolyn load her empty pie plates into the wagon. I should wake Samuel and head home, she said, though reluctant to end the evening. Mitchell glanced at the sleeping boy. He's out cold. I'll carry him to the wagon. As Mitchell gently lifted Samuel, the boy stirred slightly, then settled against the broad chest without waking. Gwendolyn's heart squeezed at the sight her son, so trusting in this man's arms. After settling Samuel in the wagon, Mitchell helped Gwendolyn to the seat. I'd feel better if you'd let me ride along with you, he said. It's full dark now. That's not necessary, she assured him. Blossom knows the way and the moon is bright. Mitchell didn't look convinced but nodded. Then I'll call on you tomorrow, if I may, to make sure you got home safely. Gwendolyn smiled at his transparent excuse. That would be nice. As she drove away, Samuel sleeping peacefully beside her, Gwendolyn felt lighter than she had in months. The evening had awakened something she'd thought might be gone forever: hope for a future that included more than just survival. True to his word, Mitchell rode to their homestead the next afternoon. Gwendolyn was in the garden when he arrived, harvesting early peas while Samuel played nearby with a wooden train Thomas had carved. "Mr. Mitchell," Samuel shouted, abandoning his toy to race toward the rider. Gwendolyn straightened, pushing a stray hair from her face and suddenly conscious of her work dress and dirt-smudged hands. Not that it mattered, she told herself. Mitchell Yates had seen her in far worse condition, half drowned and covered in river mud. "Afternoon," Mitchell called, swinging down from his horse. He'd brought something wrapped in canvas secured behind his saddle. "Right on time for coffee," Gwendolyn replied with a smile. "If you'd like some." "I'd be obliged." He untied the canvas bundle. "Brought something for Samuel first, though." Samuel bounced with excitement. "A present? For me?" Mitchell crouched down to the boy's level. "Well, I was cleaning out some old trunks and found something I thought you might like." He unwrapped the canvas to reveal a wooden box. Opening it, he displayed a set of carpentry tools, sized for small hands. "These were mine when I was about your age," Mitchell explained. "My father made them for me so I could learn woodworking alongside him." Samuel's eyes went wide. "Real tools, for me to keep." Mitchell glanced up at Gwendolyn, seeking her approval. She nodded, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "For you to keep," Mitchell confirmed. "Though you'll need to promise to be careful with them and only use them when your mother says it's all right." "I promise." Samuel carefully examined each tool: a small hammer, a saw with teeth less sharp than an adult version, a plane, and various other implements. "Will you show me how to use them? Like my pa would have." Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes, emotion quickly mastered. "I'd be honored to if your mother agrees." "Of course," Gwendolyn said softly. "Thomas would have wanted Samuel to learn these skills." Samuel hugged Mitchell impulsively, then grabbed the toolbox. "Can I show Rusty?" he asked, referring to their old dog who was napping beneath the porch. "Go ahead," Gwendolyn laughed, "though I doubt Rusty will appreciate fine craftsmanship." As Samuel raced off, Mitchell rose to his full height. "I hope I wasn't overstepping," he said. They were just gathering dust, and when he mentioned his father had begun teaching him woodworking. "It was very thoughtful," Gwendolyn assured him. "Samuel treasures connections to his father's skills, and he admires you greatly." Mitchell's expression softened. "He's an easy boy to care for." The simple statement held such warmth that Gwendolyn had to look away for a moment, busying herself with gathering her harvesting basket. "Let me wash up, and I'll put that coffee on." In the kitchen, Mitchell sat at the small table while Gwendolyn prepared coffee on the wood stove. Through the window, they could see Samuel carefully showing each tool to a supremely uninterested Rusty. "He has his father's curiosity," Mitchell observed, "and your determination." Gwendolyn smiled at the comparison. "He's his own person, too. Sometimes I look at him and wonder who he'll become." "Someone good," Mitchell said with certainty. with you guiding him." She placed a steaming mug before him, then sat across the table with her own. "I hope so. I worry sometimes that I'm not enough." Mitchell's eyes met hers. "You're more than enough, Gwendolyn. But it doesn't mean you have to do everything alone." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken meaning. Gwendolyn curled her hands around her mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the tools, for the fencing, for finding Samuel's knife, for everything." "I'd like to do more," Mitchell said, his voice low and earnest. "If you'd let me." Gwendolyn's heart raced. "What do you mean?" Mitchell seemed to choose his words carefully. "I've enjoyed getting to know you and Samuel these past weeks. I'd like to continue to call on you properly if you're willing." Though she'd sensed this might be coming, the reality of his words still took her breath away. "Mitchell, you don't need to answer now," he added quickly. "I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed. I understand if you're not ready." Gwendolyn studied his face, the earnest blue eyes, the strong features softened now with vulnerability. This man had saved her son, had shown nothing but kindness and respect. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I am still grieving Thomas," she said honestly. "There are days when the loss feels as fresh as when it happened." Mitchell nodded, acceptance in his expression, though she could see disappointment too. "But," she continued, "I've come to value your friendship greatly, and Samuel adores you." She took a deep breath. "I would welcome your calls, Mitchell. I can't promise more than that right now." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the hills. "That's all I ask for, a chance." Outside, Samuel's laughter rang out as he chased Rusty with a wooden airplane. The sound seemed to fill the small kitchen with promise. "Will you stay for supper?" Gwendolyn asked, suddenly not wanting him to leave. "Nothing fancy, just rabbit stew." "I'd like that very much," Mitchell replied. Over the next 2 months, Mitchell became a regular visitor at the Harper homestead. He would ride over after his ranch work, sometimes staying for supper, other times just stopping to check on them or bring small gifts, a book for Samuel, seeds for Gwendolyn's garden, fresh venison after a hunting trip. On Saturdays, he often took Samuel fishing or taught him to use the small tools, creating simple projects that delighted the boy. Gwendolyn watched their growing bond with a mixture of joy and caution. Samuel needed a man's influence, but she worried about him becoming too attached if things between her and Mitchell didn't progress. Yet with each visit, her own feelings for Mitchell deepened. She found herself looking forward to his arrival, to their conversations that stretched long into the evening after Samuel was asleep. Mitchell told her about his dreams for the Lazy Y, about the travels he'd undertaken before settling back on the family ranch, about the grief that had nearly consumed him after losing his wife and child. In turn, Gwendolyn shared her own hopes and fears, her determination to keep the homestead for Samuel, her struggle to balance being both mother and father to her son, her memories of the good years with Thomas. Mitchell never pushed for more than she was ready to give, seemingly content with her friendship and the occasional touch of hands as they walked together in the evening. On a warm day in late May, Mitchell arrived with Luke and a wagon loaded with lumber. "What's all this?" Gwendolyn asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped onto the porch. Mitchell removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Well, I noticed your porch roof leaks when it rains and the steps are getting wobbly. Thought we might fix them up for you if you'll allow it." Before she could protest, Samuel burst from the house, excitement lighting his face. "Are you building something, Mr. Mitchell? Can I help?" Mitchell grinned down at the boy. "As a matter of fact, I was counting on your help. Need a master carpenter for this job." Samuel's chest puffed with pride. "I'll get my tools." As the boy raced back inside, Gwendolyn shook her head fondly. "You're spoiling him." "He's earned it," Mitchell replied. "Boy works hard when we're doing projects, has a good eye too." Luke began unloading the wagon while Mitchell explained the repairs he had in mind. By midday, the old porch roof had been removed, and the new framework was taking shape. Samuel helped by holding nails and fetching tools, his small face serious with concentration. Gwendolyn provided lemonade and sandwiches for lunch, sitting on a blanket under the oak tree with the men while they ate. The easy camaraderie between them felt right somehow, as if this was how things were meant to be. "You've got a fine place here," Luke commented, leaning back against the tree trunk. "Good soil, plenty of water." "Thomas chose well," Gwendolyn agreed. "He had a vision for what this land could become." "Speaking of land," Mitchell said, his tone turning serious, "I ran into Jacob Turner in town yesterday." Gwendolyn tensed. "What did he want?" "He mentioned he'd made you another offer for your homestead. Said you'd be a fool not to take it before summer drought hits." "He's been by twice this month," Gwendolyn acknowledged. "The last time his foreman hinted that a woman alone might have trouble if her fields were to catch fire in the dry season." Mitchell's expression darkened. "That sounds like a threat." "I thought so too." She glanced at Samuel, ensuring he was out of earshot where he played with a wooden horse. "I sent him away with a shotgun pointed at his chest. Haven't seen him since." Luke whistled low. "Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Harper." Mitchell didn't smile. "Turner's dangerous when he doesn't get his way. His last neighbor who refused to sell had all his cattle stampeded through a broken fence. Never could prove Turner was behind it." "What does he want my land for so badly?" Gwendolyn wondered. "It's good land, yes, but there's plenty available further west." The brothers exchanged a glance. "There's talk," Luke said carefully, "that the railroad might be coming through this part of the county. Anyone who owns land on the proposed route could make a fortune." Gwendolyn's eyes widened. "Do you think my homestead is on that route?" "Can't say for certain," Mitchell replied. "The surveyors have been working quietly, but Turner has friends in Austin who might have tipped him off." "I won't sell," Gwendolyn said firmly. "This land is Samuel's inheritance." Mitchell reached over and briefly covered her hand with his. "Just be careful, and if Turner or his men show up again, send word to the Lazy Y immediately." The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her, and she nodded agreement. By evening, the new porch roof was complete, and the steps had been reinforced. The improvement was significant, making the small house look more prosperous and well kept. "It's wonderful," Gwendolyn told Mitchell as they stood admiring the work while Luke loaded the remaining lumber into the wagon. "How can I repay you?" Mitchell turned to face her, the setting sun casting golden light across his features. "Have supper with me tomorrow, at the Lazy Y. Mother's been asking when you'll visit again." "Just me." She glanced at Samuel, who was proudly sweeping sawdust from the new porch. "Samuel too, of course," Mitchell clarified. "Though Luke mentioned he might take him fishing at the pond while we eat, if that's all right with you." Gwendolyn recognized the invitation for what it was, a chance for them to talk privately, perhaps to define what was growing between them. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. "We'd be delighted to come," she said, and was rewarded with Mitchell's warm smile. The following evening, Gwendolyn found herself seated across from Mitchell at the Yates dining table, Alina having served a delicious meal before tactfully excusing herself to check on some preserves. Samuel had gone fishing with Luke, thrilled at the prospect of using a real rod instead of the string and stick he usually employed. "Your mother didn't really need to check preserves, did she?" Gwendolyn asked with a knowing smile. Mitchell chuckled. "About as much as Luke suddenly needed to take Samuel fishing at this exact hour." His expression grew more serious. "They're giving us time to talk." "About what?" she asked, though she knew. Mitchell set down his coffee cup and met her gaze directly. "About us, Gwendolyn. About what's been growing between us these past months." Gwendolyn's heart quickened. "Mitchell, let me speak first," he said gently. "Please." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "When Catherine died, I thought that part of my life was over," he began. "The part where I could love someone, build a family. I threw myself into the ranch, into taking care of Luke and my mother. I thought that would be enough." Mitchell rose and moved to the window, looking out at the twilight falling over the land. "Then I heard you screaming for your son that day by the river, and something changed." He turned back to her, his eyes reflecting the emotions he normally kept carefully controlled. "I know you're still healing from losing Thomas. I know Samuel is your priority, as he should be. But I've come to care for both of you more than I thought possible." Gwendolyn stood as well, drawn to him by the raw honesty in his voice. "We care for you too, Mitchell. Samuel talks about you constantly." "And you?" he asked quietly. "What do you feel, Gwendolyn?" The question hung between them, demanding truth. Gwendolyn took a deep breath. "I feel alive again," she admitted. "When you come to our home, when we talk, when I see you with Samuel, I remember what it's like to feel joy, not just responsibility, to look forward, not just back." She took a step closer to him. "It frightens me sometimes. I wasn't looking for this. I thought Thomas would be the only man I'd ever love. And now," Mitchell's voice was rough with emotion, "now I know that my heart is capable of more than I imagined, that loving Thomas doesn't mean I can't." She faltered, then forced herself to continue. "That I can't have feelings for you too." Mitchell closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to forget him. I would never want that. Thomas will always be Samuel's father, always be part of who you are." "I know," she whispered. "But I'm asking if you might find room in your heart for me too, if you might consider a future where you and Samuel aren't facing the world alone." Gwendolyn looked up into his blue eyes, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. In that moment, she knew her answer. "I already have," she said softly. Mitchell's smile was radiant as he raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. "May I kiss you, Gwendolyn Harper?" In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, a gentle exploration, but quickly deepened as months of growing feelings found expression. Mitchell's arms encircled her, strong and protective, while Gwendolyn's hands rested against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Mitchell rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for quite some time." "Me too," she admitted with a small laugh, "though I tried not to admit it to myself." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "We'll take this as slowly as you need, Gwendolyn. I'm not going anywhere." The promise in his words warmed her through. For the first time since Thomas's death, the future looked not just survivable, but bright with possibility. The moment was interrupted by the sound of excited voices approaching the house. Mitchell stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of one of her hands. "That'll be Samuel and Luke returning," he said. "Sounds like the fishing was successful." Sure enough, the door burst open and Samuel rushed in, face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Mitchell, I caught 3 fish all by myself. Mr. Luke says I'm a natural." Luke followed more sedately, carrying a string of respectable-sized trout. "The boy's not exaggerating. Never seen anyone take to fishing so quick." He glanced between Mitchell and Gwendolyn, noting their clasped hands and the lingering warmth in their expressions. A knowing smile spread across his face. "Had a good talk, did you?" Mitchell squeezed Gwendolyn's hand gently. "We did." Samuel looked between them curiously. "What did you talk about?" Gwendolyn exchanged a glance with Mitchell, who nodded encouragingly. She crouched down to Samuel's level. "Mr. Mitchell and I were talking about how much we enjoy spending time together," she explained carefully. "About how he might come to visit us even more often." Samuel's face lit up. "Really? Every day?" Mitchell chuckled, kneeling beside Gwendolyn. "Maybe not every day, partner. I still have a ranch to run, but more often, yes, if that's all right with you." The boy considered this seriously. "Would you teach me more carpentry? And how to ride a real horse, not just a pony?" "I'd be happy to," Mitchell assured him. "And would you make my mama smile more? She smiles a lot when you're around." Gwendolyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Mitchell answered gravely, "I'd consider that my most important job." Samuel nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then it's all right with me." The adults exchanged amused glances at his solemn approval. Luke clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Well, now that's settled, what say we fry up these fish? Seems like we might have something to celebrate." As they moved to the kitchen, Mitchell's hand remaining protectively at the small of her back, Gwendolyn felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't a betrayal of what she'd had with Thomas, but a new chapter one she was finally ready to begin. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness for Gwendolyn. Mitchell called on her nearly every evening, sometimes bringing small gifts, other times simply offering his company and assistance with chores around the homestead. On Sundays, he escorted her and Samuel to church in Hillsborough, where their growing attachment became the subject of approving nods and whispers. "You're good for each other," Alina told Gwendolyn one afternoon when she'd ridden over to the Lazy Y to deliver some preserves. "I haven't seen Mitchell this happy in years." "He makes me happy too," Gwendolyn admitted, watching through the window as Mitchell showed Samuel how to brush down a gentle mare. "And Samuel adores him." Alina patted her hand. "It does my heart good to see it." After Catherine died, I feared Mitchell might never open his heart again. One evening in late June, Mitchell arrived at the homestead looking uncharacteristically nervous. After supper, when Samuel had been tucked into bed, he asked Gwendolyn to walk with him in the garden. The evening was perfect. Fireflies danced among the vegetable plants, and the scent of Gwendolyn's roses filled the air. Mitchell led her to the small bench Thomas had built beneath the oak tree, where they often sat to talk in the evenings. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," Mitchell began, taking her hands in his. "I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words." Gwendolyn's heart raced. She had suspected this might be coming, had been preparing herself for it. Mitchell took a deep breath. "I know it's only been a few months since that day by the river, but I feel like I've known you and Samuel much longer. You've become essential to me, Gwendolyn, both of you." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "I'm not asking you to forget Thomas. I know he'll always hold a place in your heart, as Catherine does in mine, but I'm hoping you might consider making room for a new life with me." He opened the box to reveal a delicate ring with a small pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "Gwendolyn Harper, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had anticipated the question, hearing it spoken aloud still took her breath away. In that moment, she saw two paths before her: continuing alone, preserving Thomas's memory in solitude, or embracing a new future with this good man who had already shown his devotion to both her and Samuel. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as certainty filled her. "Yes, Mitchell, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he pulled her into his arms, his kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. "There's something else," he said when they finally parted. I've been thinking about our situation, about Turner's interest in your land, about Samuel's future." Gwendolyn tensed slightly. "What about it?" "I want you to keep your homestead," Mitchell said firmly. "It's Samuel's inheritance from his father, and I'd never ask you to give that up. But I thought perhaps we could divide our time, part of the year at the Lazy Y, part at your place. We could hire a foreman to help manage both properties." Relief washed over her. She had worried about this very issue, whether marriage would mean abandoning the land Thomas had loved. "That sounds perfect," she said. "Though are you certain? The Lazy Y is much larger, more established." Mitchell brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The Lazy Y is where I grew up, but home is wherever you and Samuel are. Besides," he added with a smile, "your land has the better fishing pond." Gwendolyn laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "When should we tell Samuel?" "Tomorrow morning." "Together?" She nodded, imagining her son's reaction. Samuel had grown so attached to Mitchell that she suspected he would be thrilled. They were right. When they sat Samuel down after breakfast the next day and explained that Mitchell had asked Gwendolyn to marry him, the boy's face lit up with excitement. "Does that mean you'll be my pa now?" he asked Mitchell directly. Mitchell knelt to the boy's level. "If you'd like that, Samuel, nothing would make me prouder. But I want you to know that I'd never try to replace your real father. Thomas will always be your pa, and we'll make sure you remember him." Samuel considered this solemnly. "I think I can have two pa's," he decided. "One in heaven and one here." Gwendolyn blinked back tears at her son's simple wisdom. "That sounds just right to me," Mitchell agreed, his own voice rough with emotion. "When will you get married?" Samuel wanted to know. "Tomorrow," the adults laughed. "Not quite that soon," Gwendolyn explained. "We need time to prepare. Perhaps in August, when the summer heat begins to ease." "That's forever," Samuel protested. Mitchell ruffled the boy's hair. "It'll go faster than you think, and we have preparations to make. Your mother deserves a proper wedding." News of their engagement spread quickly through Hillsborough and the surrounding ranches. Most reactions were positive. Mitchell was well respected in the county, and many had worried about Gwendolyn managing alone. Alina was ecstatic, immediately throwing herself into wedding preparations. Only Jacob Turner's reaction cast a shadow. When Mitchell encountered him in town shortly after announcing the engagement, Turner's congratulations had a bitter edge. "Convenient timing, Yates," Turner remarked, his thin smile not reaching his eyes. "Harper's place sitting right where the railroad's likely coming through." "That has nothing to do with it," Mitchell replied coldly. "And Mrs. Harper has made it clear she's not selling, regardless of any railroad rumors." Turner's smile tightened. "Well, perhaps you'll be more reasonable than the widow. One way or another, that land will be part of the Turner holdings before the railroad breaks ground." The implied threat lingered in Mitchell's mind as he rode back to the Lazy Y. That evening, he shared the encounter with Gwendolyn as they sat on the porch of her homestead. "He won't give up easily," Mitchell warned. "Not with the kind of money at stake if the railroad comes through." Gwendolyn's expression hardened. "He can offer or threaten all he wants. This land stays in our family." Mitchell loved the determination in her voice, the fire that had first drawn him to her. "Our family," he repeated, savoring the words. "But we should be vigilant. Turner's not known for accepting defeat gracefully." They agreed to have Luke, or one of the Lazy Y hands, stay at the homestead when Mitchell couldn't be there, at least until after the wedding, when they would be living together. Despite the shadow of Turner's threats, the weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with joy. Alina and Gwendolyn worked together on a new dress of ivory satin ordered from a dressmaker in Waco. Samuel proudly practiced carrying the rings on a small cushion Luke had made for the occasion. Mitchell rode over every evening, sometimes bringing lumber and supplies to make improvements to the homestead. Together with Luke and several hands from the Lazy Y, they built an additional bedroom for the small house and repaired the barn roof. "You don't have to do all this," Gwendolyn protested one evening as they reviewed his plans for an improved irrigation system for her vegetable garden. "The place was adequate before." Mitchell drew her into his arms. "I want to make it better for you and Samuel. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because you deserve every comfort I can provide." His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. Thomas had been a good husband, but he had been younger, still finding his way. Mitchell was established, confident in his abilities, and determined to use them to improve their lives. The wedding was set for the third Saturday in August. As the day approached, final preparations kept everyone busy. Eleanor had arranged for Reverend Thompson from the Hillsborough Church to perform the ceremony at the Lazy Y, where there would be room for all the guests. 2 nights before the wedding, Gwendolyn was awakened by Rusty's frantic barking. She slipped from bed and grabbed Thomas's old shotgun from above the door, moving cautiously to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out several figures moving toward the barn. A flicker of light caught her eye, a torch or lantern. Her blood ran cold. Turner's men, it had to be. Coming to intimidate her, or worse, to burn her out. Samuel slept soundly in his small bed across the room. She couldn't risk a confrontation with him in the house. Quickly, she threw a shawl over her nightdress and slipped outside through the back door, shotgun at the ready. Keeping to the shadows, she circled toward the barn. 3 men were inside. She could see their lantern through the open door. Rusty continued barking from where she'd shut him in the kitchen, the sound masking her approach. "Hurry up," she heard one man say. "Get the coal oil spread and let's be done with it. Turner wants it to look like an accident." "What about the woman and kid?" another voice asked, sounding nervous. "We're just burning the barn," the first man replied. "But if they happen to come out and see us, well, accidents happen." Rage surged through Gwendolyn. These men threatened not just her property but Samuel's life. Without hesitation, she raised the shotgun and fired one barrel into the air. The blast echoed in the night. "The next shot won't be a warning," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Drop your lantern and come out with your hands up." Cursing erupted from the barn, followed by the crash of something falling. A moment later, the 3 men bolted from the doorway, heading for horses tethered nearby. Gwendolyn fired the second barrel, aiming low. One man yelped in pain but kept running. Within moments, they had mounted and were galloping away into the darkness, shaking with reaction. Gwendolyn approached the barn cautiously. Inside, she found a broken lantern and 2 cans of coal oil, enough to have engulfed the structure in flames. The hay stored for winter would have burned like tinder. She had just returned to the house when the sound of approaching riders made her duck behind the water barrel, wishing she'd had time to reload the shotgun. "Gwendolyn," Mitchell's voice rang out. "Gwendolyn, are you all right?" Relief flooded through her as Mitchell and Luke galloped into the yard, rifles ready. "Here," she called, stepping into view. "I'm fine. They're gone." Mitchell was off his horse in an instant, crossing to her in long strides. His hands ran over her arms, her face checking for injuries. "We heard shots. What happened?" Briefly, she explained about the intruders and their plans. Mitchell's expression darkened with each word. "Turner," he growled. "This has gone beyond threats now. Luke had gone to check the barn. They left their coal oil," he reported, returning. "But no real damage done, thanks to Mrs. Harper's quick thinking." Mitchell pulled Gwendolyn close, his heart pounding against her cheek. "You could have been killed," he said roughly. "Why didn't you stay inside?" "They were going to burn my barn," she replied simply. "I couldn't let them." Despite the seriousness of the situation, A reluctant smile tugged at Mitchell's lips. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Gwendolyn Harper, and the most stubborn." "How did you know to come?" she asked, suddenly realizing they had arrived very quickly after the shots. Mitchell and Luke exchanged a glance. "We've been taking turns keeping watch," Luke admitted. "Ever since Turner made those threats, one of us has been camping in the woods nearby every night. Without telling me." Gwendolyn wasn't sure whether to be touched or indignant. "We didn't want to worry you," Mitchell explained. "And it seems it was a good thing we did." She couldn't argue with that. "What do we do now?" Mitchell's expression hardened. "First, we get you and Samuel to the Lazy Y tonight. You'll stay there until the wedding. Then, come morning, I'm paying a visit to Sheriff Davis with what we know." Gwendolyn nodded agreement. The attack had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Having Samuel safe at the Yates ranch would be a relief. Within the hour, they had packed essential belongings and were on their way to the Lazy Y, Samuel still half asleep in Mitchell's arms as they rode. Luke stayed behind to guard the homestead, promising to keep Rusty with him for company. The next morning, Mitchell and Gwendolyn rode into Hillsborough to speak with Sheriff Davis. The lawman listened gravely to their account of the attempted arson. "That's serious business," Davis acknowledged. "But did you see their faces clearly? Can you identify any of them as Turner's men?" "It was dark," Gwendolyn admitted reluctantly. "But they mentioned Turner by name, said he wanted it to look like an accident," the sheriff sighed. "Hearsay. Not enough to arrest Turner himself, but I'll have a word with him, make it clear I'm watching. And I'll keep an eye out for anyone with buckshot wounds." He nodded toward the shotgun Mitchell had brought along as evidence. "That might give us something concrete to work with." It wasn't the decisive action they'd hoped for, but it was something. As they left the sheriff's office, Mitchell squeezed Gwendolyn's hand. "It'll be all right," he assured her. "After the wedding, you'll be at the Lazy Y most of the time anyway. We can keep a closer watch on your homestead." "Our homestead," she corrected with a small smile. "And you're right. Turner can't intimidate us out of what's rightfully ours." Mitchell's expression softened as he looked down at her. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. He bent and kissed her briefly, mindful of the public street. "I love you, Gwendolyn Harper. And in 2 days, you'll be Gwendolyn Yates." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a hint of coolness in the air that promised the eventual end of summer's heat. At the Lazy Y, the house was a flurry of activity as final preparations were made. Gwendolyn stood in the guest bedroom that had been hers for the past 2 nights, gazing at her reflection in Alina's full-length mirror. The ivory satin dress was simpler than what might be worn in a city wedding, but its clean lines suited her. Alina had woven late summer wildflowers into her honey blonde hair, which hung loose down her back in gentle waves. A soft knock at the door preceded Alina's entrance. The older woman's eyes filled with tears when she saw Gwendolyn. "Oh, my dear. You look beautiful," she said, crossing to adjust a fold in the dress's skirt. "Mitchell won't be able to take his eyes off you." "Thank you for everything, Alina," Gwendolyn said, emotion tightening her throat. "For welcoming us into your family, for helping with the wedding." "Hush now," Alina said gently. "You've brought my son back to life. That's gift enough for me." She pressed a small box into Gwendolyn's hands. "This is for you, something borrowed, as they say." Inside lay a delicate pearl necklace that perfectly complemented the engagement ring Mitchell had given her. "It's beautiful," Gwendolyn breathed. "It was my mother's," Alina explained, helping to fasten it around Gwendolyn's neck. "I wore it at my own wedding. Someday, perhaps you'll lend it to a daughter or daughter-in-law." The door burst open before Gwendolyn could respond, and Samuel rushed in, looking uncomfortable but handsome in his new suit, his hair slicked down with water in a futile attempt to tame his curls. "Mama, you look like an angel," he exclaimed. "Mr. Mitchell is waiting and he looks real nervous. Mr. Luke says he might faint." The women laughed, the emotional moment broken by Samuel's exuberance. "Well, we can't have the groom fainting," Gwendolyn said, giving her son a careful hug to avoid crushing her dress. "Are you ready to carry the rings?" Samuel nodded solemnly, patting his pocket where the small cushion with the rings resided. "I practiced all morning. I won't drop them, I promise." "I know you won't," Gwendolyn assured him. "Now go tell Reverend Thompson we're ready to begin." As Samuel dashed off, Eleanor squeezed Gwendolyn's hand once more. "I'll go take my seat. Luke will be up in a moment to escort you down." Left alone briefly, Gwendolyn took a deep breath. She had not expected to marry again, had resigned herself to raising Samuel alone after Thomas's death. Yet here she was, about to join her life with Mitchell Yates, a man who had literally plunged into raging waters to save her son, who had shown her that her heart had room for new love without diminishing the old. "Thomas," she whispered to the empty room, "I hope you understand. I'll always love you, always honor your memory. But I think you would approve of Mitchell of the father he'll be to Samuel, the husband he'll be to me." A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, bringing the scent of the roses that decorated the yard. Gwendolyn chose to take it as a sign of blessing. Another knock announced Luke's arrival. He whistled low when he saw her. "Well now, Mrs. Harper, no wonder my brother's been walking around like a man in a dream these past weeks." Gwendolyn laughed, grateful for his ability to ease her nervousness. "Thank you, Luke. Both for the compliment and for everything you've done to help us." He offered his arm with a gallant bow. "Shall we go make an honest man of my brother?" The ceremony took place in the Yates front yard, beneath an arch of late summer flowers. Nearly 50 guests had gathered, neighbors, friends from church, hands from the Lazy Y. Mitchell stood waiting beside Reverend Thompson, looking handsome in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on the house entrance where Gwendolyn would appear. When she stepped outside on Luke's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled guests. But Gwendolyn saw only Mitchell, whose face transformed with such joy at the sight of her that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. Samuel preceded them down the makeshift aisle, walking with careful dignity, the ring cushion held before him as if it were made of glass. When he reached Mitchell, the boy beamed up at the man who would soon be his stepfather. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They had chosen traditional vows, finding comfort in the time-honored words. When Mitchell placed the gold band on her finger beside his grandmother's ring, his hands were steady but his voice roughened with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson declared. "Mitchell, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, appropriate for the public setting, but filled with promise. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell Yates, the applause was enthusiastic. Samuel tugged at Mitchell's sleeve. "Is it official now? Are you my pa?" Mitchell crouched down, heedless of his new suit. "It's official, partner, if that's what you want to call me." "Pa," Samuel said experimentally, then nodded, satisfied. "I like it." Mitchell's eyes glistened as he pulled the boy into a quick embrace. When he straightened, he kept one hand on Samuel's shoulder and the other around Gwendolyn's waist, a family united. The celebration continued through the afternoon and into the evening. Tables had been set up under the trees, laden with food contributed by neighbors. A small band played, and couples danced on a wooden platform, similar to the one from the spring gathering where Mitchell and Gwendolyn had first danced together. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Mitchell found Gwendolyn where she had been chatting with Mrs. Olson about possibly supplying pies to the boarding house on a regular basis. "May I steal my wife for a dance?" he asked, the word wife clearly bringing him pleasure. Mrs. Olson shooed them toward the dance floor with a smile. "Go on, you two lovebirds. We can discuss business another time." As they moved together to the gentle melody, Mitchell held her closer than propriety might strictly allow. "Happy, Mrs. Yates," he murmured near her ear. "Very," she replied, leaning into his strength. "Though it still feels strange to hear that name. You'll get used to it." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I plan to use it often in the coming decades." Gwendolyn smiled up at him. "Decades, is it? You sound very sure of our future." "I am." His expression sobered slightly. "I know life holds no guarantees, Gwendolyn. We've both learned that the hard way. But I promise you this: every day we're given together, I'll do my best to make you and Samuel happy." "We already are," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to brush his lips with hers. "You've given us more than I ever dared hope for after Thomas died." They were interrupted by Samuel, who had been playing with the other children but now approached with drooping eyelids despite his best efforts to stay awake. "Pa," he said, the word coming more naturally now, "are we going home soon?" Mitchell exchanged a glance with Gwendolyn. They had decided to spend their wedding night at her homestead, their homestead now, which Luke had been preparing during the ceremony. The Lazy Y hands would keep the celebration going here, while Luke would stay at the ranch house with Alina. "Yes, partner," Mitchell replied. "Your mother and I are ready to head home. Say good night to Grandmother Yates and Uncle Luke first." As Samuel went to find Alina, Mitchell took Gwendolyn's hand. "Are you ready?" She knew he was asking more than if she was ready to leave the party. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm ready for our new life to begin." They made their farewells amid good-natured teasing from the guests. Luke had arranged for their wagon, already loaded with the gifts and Gwendolyn's belongings from her stay at the Lazy Y. Mitchell helped her up to the seat, then lifted a half-asleep Samuel to sit between them. As they drove away, cheers and well wishes followed them into the gathering darkness. Samuel leaned against Gwendolyn's side, asleep before they had gone a mile. Mitchell reached across to take her hand, and they rode in companionable silence through the starlit Texas night, toward home and the future that awaited them. Epilogue. 2 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the yard of the Harper Yates homestead as Gwendolyn stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The sound of hammering from behind the house had stopped, and she expected Mitchell and Samuel would be coming around for the lemonade she'd prepared. In the 2 years since their wedding, much had changed. True to their plan, they divided their time between the Lazy Y and the homestead, spending spring and summer here where the garden thrived, and fall and winter at the ranch where the larger house was better suited to the colder months. The railroad had indeed come through, though not directly across their land as Turner had believed. Instead, it passed a mile to the north, close enough to benefit from increased access to markets, but not so close as to disrupt their way of life. Turner's attempted intimidation had eventually led to his arrest when one of his men, caught for another crime, had confessed to the attempted arson in exchange for leniency. Mitchell appeared around the corner of the house, 7-year-old Samuel chattering excitedly beside him. They had been building a small stable for Samuel's pony, a gift for his recent birthday. "Mama," Samuel called, spotting her. "Pa says we can paint the stable red like the big barn at the Lazy Y." "Does he indeed?" Gwendolyn replied with a smile. "Well, I suppose that's fitting." Mitchell climbed the steps to join her on the porch, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "The lemonade smells wonderful," he said, though lemonade had no scent. His eyes crinkled with meaning as he added more softly, "And so do you." Gwendolyn laughed, swatting him playfully with her apron. "Go wash up, both of you. The lemonade is ready, and there are cookies cooling." Samuel needed no further encouragement, racing to the pump to splash water over his hands and face. "How are you feeling?" Mitchell asked, his hand gently touching her rounded belly. At 7 months pregnant, Gwendolyn carried their first child together, a blessing they had begun to think might not happen after a year of marriage had brought no signs of conception. "Wonderful," she assured him. "Your daughter has been kicking up a storm today." Mitchell grinned. "Still so certain it's a girl, mother's intuition," Gwendolyn replied confidently. They had already chosen the name Catherine Alina if it was a girl, honoring both Mitchell's first wife and his mother. Samuel bounded up the steps, his face still damp from washing. "Can I feel the baby kick?" he asked eagerly. Gwendolyn guided his small hand to a spot on her belly. After a moment, the baby obliged with a solid kick that made Samuel's eyes widen with delight. "She's strong," he declared. "Like a little cowgirl already." Mitchell laughed, ruffling his stepson's hair. "Could be a little cowboy in there, you know." Samuel shook his head with the certainty only a child could possess. "No, it's a sister. I asked for a sister." "Well, that settles it then," Mitchell said solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement as they met Gwendolyn's over the boy's head. As they settled on the porch with their lemonade and cookies, Gwendolyn looked out over their land, the vegetable garden now harvested for the season. The small orchard Thomas had planted beginning to bear fruit. The new paddock for Samuel's pony. So much had changed, and yet the essence remained. This was home, now expanded to include the lazy Y as well. Mitchell's arm settled around her shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Yates." "I was just thinking about rivers," she said thoughtfully. "Rivers?" Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "How they can destroy and give life at the same time. How they carry things away but sometimes bring them back." She looked up at him, love warming her gaze. "That river nearly took Samuel from me, but it also brought you to us." Mitchell's eyes softened with understanding. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best ones," he agreed, his hand finding hers. "Though I'd prefer if this little one," he patted her belly gently, "stays far away from any raging waters." "Pa's going to teach me to swim real good next summer," Samuel interjected, clearly following the conversation. "Then I can help if anybody else falls in the river." "That's right," Mitchell agreed, "though let's hope nobody does." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they had worked together, Gwendolyn leaned into her husband's strength, profoundly grateful for the family they had built, honoring the past while embracing the future, bound together by love that had begun with a rescue but had grown into so much more. The river that had nearly taken everything from her had, in its way, given her a second chance at happiness. And as Mitchell's hand rested protectively over their unborn child, Gwendolyn Harper Yates knew that some currents, though frightening in their power, carried you exactly where you were meant to be.